All for joining us for this primer on moving out and relocation. Thanks for taking a break in your day to learn more about your journey to relocating to new lab space. My name is Jennifer Reilly. I'm the President and COO at Safety Partners, and I'll be moderating our panel today. Just want to cover a couple of logistics. My colleague Lauren Laidlaw is also on the panel, and she'll help moderate our and monitor our questions. So if you see you can turn your attention to the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and that's the opportunity to enter your questions and to get those answered. So our goal today is to have this be as interactive as possible in this virtual environment. So please feel free to enter your questions, and we'll sprinkle those in throughout the presentation and throughout the discussion today. So at this point, I'd like to welcome our panelists. I'm going to do a quick introduction, and then they'll have a little more time to talk more about their key roles in the relocation process in a few minutes. So maybe you just give us a little wave when I mention your name or a head nod. So first we have Becky Boyer. She's the Director of Life Sciences at OTJ Architects. We have Pat Gallagher, President and CEO at Hereva Consultants. Phillip Pavlovich, the Associate Director of Development and Project Management at Siena Construction. And lastly, we have Joe Pearce, Director at Newmark Knight & Frank. So welcome everyone. We're thrilled that you're on the line today and look forward to a great discussion. So as we begin our conversation today, we'd like to have Pat set the stage as we think about keys to building that foundation as you embark on this journey to relocating your lab.
Thanks, Jennifer. I really appreciate it. Yep, my name's Pat Gallagher with Hereva Consultants. My role usually on the project is to provide project management to support to a number of firms that are making that first leap out of the incubator into their first piece of real estate. And as you do that, you have to realize that you're actually building a project here and building a project team. And it does follow a certain scheduled step-by-step process as we go through this for most of our clients. And the biggest piece, which Joe will talk about in a short period, is actually going to find that first piece of real estate that you're looking for, and how are you going to get it designed to meet your needs, and how are you going to get it built out to actually service what you require, and also after that, how are you going to get it operationally working for yourself. So the biggest key element of any project that you embark on is to understand what the team roles are, and where we have real estate advisors, where we have designers, where we have the construction manager, where we have the operational startup piece. But it's also to understand what your core programmatic needs are. Now, this is what's known in the industry as the project charter. And if you're about to go find that first piece of real estate and you're about to get it designed and fit up to your needs, you have to be giving your team that you create, the design and construction team and the real estate team, you have to be giving them the high-level programmatic needs for what you're trying to achieve, i.e. what kind of company you are, how big your headcount aspirations are going to be over the next 2 to 3 years, 5 years, whatever the term of the lease needs to be. What is your research aspirations? Do you need anything special? Have you got a research platform that's needs and requires specialty equipment or specialty spaces like animal facility or radioactive? Are you going to be doing any CGMP work in the space? So all of these things don't need to be put into detail. Becky will talk later about the programming effort, about what designers do once they found a space and they try to plan it out for you. But I think the key piece of any of building this team is to understand exactly what you're trying to achieve from a big picture standpoint, so that we can lay a foundation and lay a charter for the project, and it gives then the rest of the team something to work with along the way. And so I just wanted to make sure that people understand the basis of a project,
No, that's perfect. And it's a great segue into building the team and how important it is, the roles and responsibilities of the team, not only of the client who's going to go out there and look for space and need that space, but those that are going to support that effort. So At this time, it would be great for each of you to introduce yourself in a little bit more detail. And, you know, as you talk about who you are as a company, the fluidity in the relationship of, you know, it's not necessarily a linear relationship, and how we all work together to support this process. And just, you know, talk about the pain points that you help alleviate through this process. So Becky, why don't you lead us off? Oh, I'm sorry, actually Joe's going to lead us off from the broker perspective. And
Great, thanks Jennifer. So as Jennifer mentioned, my name's Joe Pearce. I'm with Newmark Knight Frank. We're a global commercial real estate firm, touching all facets of the real estate business. Locally, I spend a lot of my time assisting life science companies and technology companies, you know, with identifying and securing lab and office space throughout Boston, Cambridge, and you know, the suburban markets. You know, as Jennifer mentioned, you know, I'm just kind of one cog in the bigger piece of the puzzle here. I typically get involved with clients, you know, early on in the whole process. You know, maybe there was a fundraise, you know, whatever it may be. There was something that you know, some sort of event happened where you know, companies are now thinking about, you know, looking for their first space outside of an incubator, and that's typically when I get involved. You know, the questions that I'd be asking, very high level at that stage, is kind of, you know, what is your science? What are you trying to do? You know, space varies. You know, if you have heavy chemistry needs, that's going to be a different type of space. Possibly, you know, probably, you know, most likely a different type of building with systems that can support that type of use. Whereas if you're a biology use, you know, that's more or less what you see common as available in the market today. So once I identify kind of what you're trying to do within the space and what your goals are as a company, you know, then we can kind of drill into, you know, if there's any budget constraints that we want to talk about. That directly kind of ties into, you know, locations. You know, another important factor would be the timing. You know, typically, you know, more cases than not, you know, I get involved in, you know, companies, you know, typically need space yesterday, which is totally great. And, you know, obviously, you know, you run into a lot of companies whom are kind of up against really strict timelines. But having, you know, the ability to forecast when you're going to need space is really critical in the whole process, just because, you know, you want to give yourself some time to, you know, go out, tour spaces, find something you like, you know, negotiate a proposal, then you want to negotiate a lease, and then as far as if you need a build out, you want to factor in, you know, it could be upwards of 6-7 months to build out a space from shell condition. So timing is definitely important. And then, you know, just also understanding the profile of the company, kind of what's driving the requirement, you know, who the, you know, venture capital backing is, you know, who the founders are, you know, where everyone's located. You know, so all those things, you know, play a pretty critical role. And yeah, that's where I kind of fit into the whole process. But I would involve everyone on this call here today. We're all, you know, kind of important, you know, pieces to the puzzle. So, you know, at an early stage, you know, I would like to, you know, get someone, you know, in construction, in project management, you know, in safety protocol involved pretty early in the process.
oh, great, thanks, Joe. Pat, maybe, I know you gave a bit of an introduction, but maybe you could say a little bit more about, you know, the pain points that you help alleviate in that process, and a bit more about your role.
Yeah, again, I'm Pat Gallagher. I'm the president and CEO of Hereva Consultants in Boston and Cambridge. We are a project management firm, predominantly owners representatives. We specialize mostly in the life sciences arena. That's our core industry. I've personally been working in the biopharmaceutical industry for nearly 30 years. It's been something that, you know, that we specialize in. What we do as project managers, and in the early stages, oftentimes a client, if they have been in the incubator, which is mostly a lot of our clients, that they've been working out of the incubator for a period of time, and I know there's a number of people watching the webinar today that are in that position, you know, they don't normally have a facilities and operations team. They're not going to. They're only a company of 5 or 6 people. And in a bigger organization where it's a more established mid-size biofarm, they will already have a facilities and operations team. That's someone that can help them with that. They may even have one key individual within the organization that can manage and deliver a project of this kind. Oftentimes they don't have that. So as a firm like us, as a tenant representative, again, we specialize mostly in tenants. In the life sciences, we would help weave all of those pieces together. So, you know, the selection of this team early, a designer, a CM, you know, who your brokerage team is, helping with the real estate and some of the operational and health and safety aspects. All of this all has to be thought about and brought together and created into a roadmap and a master schedule right up at the front of the project. And that's what we would do. We would come in and we would help you select your right designer, your right construction manager, and who's going to help with the operations piece. And at this point, it's usually someone like myself and Joe are working hand in hand, you know, once it comes to doing that early stage program that I talked about earlier, and also, you know, just figuring out what's going to be the right kind of space so that we can find that suitable piece of real estate for them. So that's what we do.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. You know, we're going a little bit chronologically on how you would involve these as we have people introduce themselves. But, you know, I'd like to just interject together with Pat the role that Safety Partners plays. And so you hit something about timeline, and I'm sure you'll all agree that it's never too early to start engaging the people on your team and let the experts on your team help guide you to when once you start those communications, they know when to turn on more of our time to dedicate to it, and when we just need to be in the background and, you know, be chiming in on that. So Safety Partners is an environmental health and safety consulting firm. We get involved and we look at workplace safety, but in these relocation programs, we're looking at your permitting. How do we translate your EHS program from the incubator setting, where maybe you had very little responsibility outside of following the program for that program, and now you're going to be responsible for it yourself. You need to secure those permits, make sure you understand the lead time of those applications so that, you know, that is not a bottleneck in your day one operations. So that's where Safety Partners can come in and help you get up and ready operationally as soon as the space is ready and you're in it. So next, Becky, why don't you give us more information from your perspective on that architectural piece?
Sure, thanks, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Becky Boyer, and I am the Director of Life Sciences at OTG Architects. Our role is traditionally after they found your space and maybe Pat's on early to help guide you with selecting an architect. But our role is to plan and design your new office and lab space, and also coordinate the engineer for the infrastructure requirements of this project. So we'll help you explain the design process. A lot of times people have never done a project type like this. So we'll explain to you how the process goes for design, help you understand the decisions that need to be made, look at your office culture and your lab projection needs today, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years from now, and look at whether you may grow your headcount, you may grow your lab, and then space plan accordingly. Maybe that means that you want to sublease some space right now. We'll look at how we can easily remove some walls later on to allow you to grow into that sublease space. And then look at your equipment needs, what infrastructure we need to supply. And also, you know, I came in a little bit in the middle of the process, but that doesn't mean that Joe might not include us early on for test fits to help you understand what various buildings may mean once you plan that space and what decisions you have to make. Do you need as much space as you thought you might need? Or does one building suit your plan a little bit better than others? And although Phillip hasn't explained his role yet, he may come in early as well with Joe and I to price these test fits and say, how much money is this looking like it might cost us to build out? So we're kind of on that journey to learn your science, learn the way that you guys work, and then plan these new spaces accordingly.
No, excellent. And that's perfect segue into Phillip and how you involve Phillip in the process as part of those test fits. So Phillip, take it away.
Thank you very much. And Welcome, everyone. My name is Phillip Pavlovich, and I'm the Associate Director of Business Development and Project Management at Siena. Siena Construction is a 30-year-old construction management firm. We're based in Cambridge. Our forte and focus is on building life science companies, labs, and office spaces. We do not build a lot of ground up new construction, at least we haven't lately. But we do an awful lot of TI work, which stands for tenant improvements, and all around Boston. As everyone has alluded to, Siena can get involved upfront when a tenant is looking at a particular space, especially to get a sense for what MEP systems are in place, which stands for mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. There are oftentimes some of the larger ticket items involved in a build out, especially for lab space. So we can analyze what is existing, what needs to be increased or improved, and work with Becky, OTJ, the engineers to help determine that. Ultimately, we end up pricing out the project, building the project, and coordinating it with everyone on this team, as well as the subcontractors that actually come in and do their part for installing the electrical systems, the plumbing systems, the HVAC systems, the interior build out, everything that's involved in the construction process, we coordinate on behalf. So quick overview.
Excellent. Well, I think that gives the participants on the call today a sense of, where you come in and help alleviate these pain points and how we all work together as a team. So if you're like me, we all learn from example and learn, from hearing these anecdotes. So we'd like to, as a group, now have a discussion on our hypothetical company and how maybe you could see yourself in some way, of the example that we'd like to discuss. So let's just hypothesize. You've had a call from a new company. You're all excited. New call, new business. There are about 6 people, and of course they're planning aggressive growth. They're anticipating financing. It's maybe not quite secured yet, but getting some Series B financing. So that always plays mix into the budget and that process. They need to relocate from their current incubator space. Of course, they need to relocate as soon as possible. And they're looking at, as Pat alluded to earlier, how are they going to function in the space, and do they need some specialized space? So they've identified the need for biosafety level 2 space. And maybe they're also considering a vivarium further down the line. There's many players involved. How do you get started with this XYZ therapeutics? And so maybe from there, Joe, you can talk a little bit about, similarly how you'd approach this new company and get them off the ground.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think XYZ Therapeutics recently changed their name to Corona Therapeutics. So
okay.
We'll go with that. But any event, so, speaking about XYZ or Corona Therapeutics, typically I would get involved on the earlier side of the conversation, of them thinking about when they're going to be relocating from an incubator. What I'd like to know, and I think I've touched upon this a little bit, but first and foremost, it's, kind of what your science, what you're doing within the space. That'll narrow down kind of, the buildings and the selection that, I'd put in front of the prospective client. And then, also understand kind of, what their headcount is, obviously, and, what their timing is. And in a market like we're in today, it's just very tight out there, even with, the COVID situation. Some may think that, oh, it's, must have softened up, yada, yada, yada. But unfortunately, that's not really the case for the life sciences. The market continues to be very, very strong, very, very tight, and very, very expensive, but depending on what you're looking for and what your goals are. So having a clear understanding of those goals from the get-go is super important. And that kind of ties into, just having a transparent communication and a single point of contact at the company who's in a position to make decisions, because things move really quickly, especially in an environment like we're in today with very little vacancy and just a ton of demand that's out there right now. So spaces tend to not even come on the market per se. A lot of leases are being negotiated behind the scenes. So just having a clear understanding, again, I'll say it again, of kind of what they're trying to do, you know, kind of what their head count is, so we can back into an approximate square footage, and then, you know, a timing, their timing. So, you know, you can kind of try to fit them into a space that makes sense, you know, in the area. So, you know, kind of back to that, but though, like, you know, another key question obviously will be, you know, is there any budget constraints with the company? You know, oftentimes companies may be surprised, you know, at, you know, what the costs are for leasing new space. So making sure that I'm as transparent as possible with not only the rents that they can expect, but also, you know, these hidden costs, what we called our triple net costs. Those are your, you know, your proportionate share of tax, real estate taxes and operating expenses for the building. And then on top of that, you're going to be paying your utilities as well. And in some cases, that could be an extra 30, 40 bucks a foot on top of the rent. So making sure that everyone's on the same page as far as, you know, what the overall costs are going to be. I find it's just super important because no one wants to be surprised, you know, down the road into a negotiation that, you know, what they're expecting to pay is really not the case. And then budget kind of directly ties into location. You know, just because obviously, you know, Kendall Square, you know, you could think of that as kind of the ground zero, you know, for the life sciences world. And obviously, you know, with that, it's the most expensive place to be. So kind of as you, you know, go out from Kendall Square, prices, you know, tend to drop. But anything within 128, you're going to, you know, there is the chance of having some sticker shock. You know, as far as, you know, what tenants are expecting, you know, to see there. So I think to kind of wrap it up, it's just having a full understanding of the requirement, you know, whom the direct point of contact is with the company, understanding their budget parameters, location parameters. And then finally, you know, I didn't touch upon it, but the timing, which is super important, you know, just because there's very limited space on the market today. So understanding, you know, when they need to be up and running, so we can kind of back into that and work to meet those timing goals as closely as possible.
You know, so Joe, given what you talked about, the, you know, the tight search for space, and Becky alluded to this earlier, are you generally seeing companies taking more space than they need and going into that sublease situation just to grab the space and plan for future? Is that, you know, advice that you typically give to these small companies?
Yeah, absolutely. You see it more times than not. You know, they're just with limited options. Some companies are just forced to take, you know, 20, 30, 40% more than they actually need today, which in a hot market like we're in is not necessarily a bad thing, because typically you can find a qualified subtenant for those companies to fill that gap for a 2 to 3 year period, which indirectly helps your client because that allows them to grow into the space, you know, over a longer term. And that's another thing to keep in mind too. It's, you know, in my position, it's super important to be transparent with these companies, you know, regarding term requirements. You know, for the most part, you know, typically landlords want to see 7 to 10 year terms commitments from these companies. You are seeing more landlords building out lab suites on a speculative basis. And in those instances, you find that, you know, there's a little bit more flexibility on term requirements. Sometimes, you know, you'll see those landlords be willing to commit to 5 year terms, which is an attractive, you know, term for early stage companies. But for the most part, companies coming out of incubators, they're primarily used to flexibility as far as timing and not having to commit for an extended period of time. So just making sure everyone understands, you know, the nuances of the way the deal would work, you know, is important from the get-go.
So now they have all this equipment and all this planning and maybe not the internal expertise. So we turn to Pat and his team and how they're going to get into that space and pick up their pipettes, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about that. And I think timeline, you know, for people to walk away today to get a sense of, you know, when they start this process and when can they realistically expect to be in space, you know, would also be helpful for the team to touch upon.
Yeah, and I think we just got a question that came up on the screen about equipment lists and how do you keep track of that when when certain firms that are moving out of the incubator, they don't really have an awful lot of their own equipment at this point. You know, they do in the small amount of lab that they've been using at the incubator, but at this point, they've probably been sharing a lot of the equipment at most of these incubator spaces had shared equipment, some of the key standardized equipment. But yeah, you know, putting in equipment, I mean, Becky's going to talk about how we get around that. But yeah, I think for me, from the start of the project, when I'm, you know, working with Joe and they're trying to figure out some of this high level programming, I think the other piece, most of the times I get brought on, is so that we can put together a master schedule and also so that we can take care of the money. Most of the tenant clients that I have, they want someone who's going to run the budget, make sure that everything's captured. There is the biggest component of the project is going to be the construction fit up. A lot of tenants, you know, they understand the world of tenant improvement money being provided by the landlord. Oftentimes they want to limit the amount of money that they spend on the project to within that TI money, because they don't have a lot of their own capital at this point. You know, they're expecting Series B funding or whatever it might be. And then I also like to make sure that all of the other components, I mean, they're going to be buying furniture. They're going to be buying things like AV systems, security systems. They're going to be doing the move that we'll help them with once they've got the place fit up. All of these other costs, they would be paying for, you know, the architect's time and the engineer's time. All of these things that are outside of the construction. Yeah, the construction usually is about 70% of the project itself, but there are all these other pieces that I think a lot of times clients, they're just not aware of it at the outset of the project. You know, that they need to understand that there is other money that they're going to be spending when this project moves forward. And then I also like to make sure that tenant clients understand the cultural change that's going to happen to their organization. They may be a little disparate now inside an incubator. They've only a small organization, but they could be in Cambridge or they could be in Boston, and they're used to having this sort of urban environment around them. And Joe will tell you that geographically, most people are now moving out to the you know, what we call the burbs or the 128 corridor, because the price of real estate is a little bit cheaper out there. And I think a lot of clients that I work with, it's something that they have to get their head around. You know, it's something that's going to culturally change them, and it's going to be a whole different world for them as well. So we like to set the stage.
To that point, you make a really good point. You know, landlords, what you're seeing more times than not is landlords are providing, you know, complimentary shuttle bus services from their suburban, you know, lab building locations, you know, directly to, you know, the red line, to kind of give these tenants, understanding that these tenants are typically coming from a more urban environment. So, you know, you are seeing landlords kind of understand, you know, what these tenants are looking for, and providing them with the amenity base that, you know, that helps alleviate that pain of now being in the suburbs.
Right.
Jennifer, I just want to hop in for a moment. There's a lot of great questions. I know we're going to get to all of them, but I just wanted to see if anybody wanted to think about this in their responses. We're getting some questions in terms of how companies can be thinking about their budget in terms of upfront money as they're thinking about a move. So just more people want to think about that.
Yeah, since Pat, you kind of ride herd on the budget of the project, and you know, what's your sense of companies moving out of incubators in terms of cash budget for that move?
Well, it varies. It all depends on what kind of, and I never want to be the one to quote numbers, because people will always come back to me on it. But, you know, I mean, in 128 corridor, office space could be in the $180 a square foot. Lab space itself could be $250 to $300 a square foot. Prices are, you know, not plateauing at the moment, but they're still on the rise, believe it or not. We've still got a lot of construction work going around. So that would purely just be for the construction cost. That would be how much, you know, we would be paying, you know, Phil to fit up the space. You know, it's that sort of range we're talking about. And then I think they should be expecting to put another 30% on top of that for soft costs, with things like the design fees, furniture, AV, security, they should be thinking about another 30% on top of that for the kind of cost that they should be spending for new space.
Gives them a sense.
Yep.
Becky, do you want to talk about there was a question that came up about lab equipment and, getting a sense of if they don't quite know, as Pat alluded to, they're in this incubator space, they don't own their own equipment for some things, it's shared, and now they have to purchase their own, but they're not really sure what that's going to look like. And maybe you can tie that into your role as well as, your bigger role that you play in the project.
Sure. So in the case of the question, maybe you haven't kept a very good catalog of what you have. That is also a service that we can provide. We can come in, survey your equipment, provide you with an equipment list, provide a tagging system so that you can actually label the equipment so that later you can go back and know that piece 191 is this benchtop centrifuge made by Thermo Fisher, and it will have all the utilities, it'll have the size, and that not only allows your finance and your lab teams to understand what it is you have, it also allows us to plan how much space we need for the design. So, if we plan a certain length of benchtop surfaces for you and you have more equipment than can be placed on that, we may not have enough space for you to fit everything. And so it's not a problem if you don't have a comprehensive list of equipment. We just did this for another company and provided them a floor plan where everything sat, and then this equipment list that gave you all of the information for all the pieces of equipment. Now, on planning, say you maybe don't know exactly what it is you're buying. A good way to start is to look at what you're using and what manufacturers you have now in an incubator space. You may like how that piece of equipment operates, you might not, and certain things like incubators or biosafety cabinets may traditionally come from a manufacturer that you're going to see all over the place. So, highlighting the pieces of equipment that are really needed for special utilities is probably the biggest piece to know. A small counter or benchtop scale is going to be easily plugged in at the bench. But for a mass spectrometer, you're going to need exhaust. You're going to need specialty gases, possibly. You're probably going to need a higher voltage electrical system for that. And so if you're going to start and say, okay, maybe I'm going to figure out what some of these other pieces are down the road, the big high utility pieces are what we want to know right up front. Fume hoods are obviously built in, and a long lead item as well. So that's something we'd want to know early on. And we can take you to lab showrooms and you can talk to lab vendors and understand what the different systems are, how they work, and what might be best suited for you. And then those smaller pieces that might not be as important, although they're still important, those can kind of trickle in as the design comes. But overall, we really do want a pretty comprehensive equipment list. It helps your movers place things. It allows Phillip to be able to construct the space accordingly. It is a process, but it's something that's very important to be done.
So one of the things you mentioned, and maybe this will tie in, Phillip, I'm sure you'll weigh in on this too, is as companies are thinking of subleasing, taking more space, subleasing some of the space, how do they think about their approach to splitting, say, mechanical, MEP services and thinking about their equipment, and, how should they approach that in that sublease scenario?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it can get fairly tricky. If you're sharing rooftop units, for example, with HVAC, that they would have to be sub-metered or install your own system. And back to what Becky was just saying about a lot of these items that are longer lead time items, it's another reason to get involved, figure out those equipment needs, and get those longer lead time items ordered up front, because some of them might take 2 months or 2.5 months to be manufactured and delivered. And meanwhile, the tenant might be trying to move in 2 or 2.5 months. So it's really important to coordinate those items and make sure they're identified up front.
And I would say future equipment too. We want to plan now for what your future needs may be. Maybe that means we plan flexible casework and utilities that are able to be extended into these other spaces, but we want to have an idea, just a general idea of what that growth may be, what departments it may be in, and that way, as you grow, you're primarily set up for what those new functions will be.
Yeah, you know, Safety Partners hates to be the one to come to the table to say, oh, now you need a, you know, an eye wash and safety shower in this space that, you know, wasn't designed early on, and how you get the water to that. And that's, you know, that retrofit is always a big headache for everyone.
An idea too, I think, of what you want to provide to that subtenant space. Some people just want to leave it shelf space in a way and have that company coming in fit it out. Some people want to provide, okay, let's say this is a microscopy room, let's say this is a tissue culture room, and then they get designed that way, and that way the company coming in, you know, their requirements are fulfilled with those spaces, and you can, you know, maybe there's some minor modifications that are needed, but primarily it's already set up in a way for them.
So Philip, I wanted to turn to you if you had more to add on the construction piece, and maybe also what you're seeing, a sense of a timeline for planning.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, some of the trends, just to kind of add to what Joe was saying, is definitely more activity heading towards the suburbs, and much of that is just supply and demand. There isn't the square footage available in Cambridge, a little bit less expensive. But we are seeing also now with with COVID that more office space is being considered for conversions to lab space, and that comes in the form of either an entire building or a space within a building that isn't now leasing. There isn't the office demand. So landlords are looking for more conversions to lab space. So that's a little bit trickier build out, again, with the infrastructure that's available. Another trend we're seeing is more companies converting office space to lab space. Not uncommon to have a 60-40 combo, and we're now seeing more towards a 50-50 or 40-60 more lab space being considered. So those are some interesting trends. COVID is also playing a role in what's going on. It is really job conditions specific. Some projects that are very tight floor plans where it requires a lot of trades might take longer. Time is money. Schedules are what dictate typically budgets. So if it takes longer to build out a space, or let's say it's in a higher rise building with elevators and freight elevators to be considered for materials, it could end up costing more money. On the flip side of that, we've also seen projects that have actually reduced schedules because the buildings aren't occupied or the floor isn't occupied. And rather than having to do things on overtime, nights, weekends, we're actually able to work during the day. So actually saving some money as well as compressing the schedule to save money. So it really depends on the job conditions and the client and what's going on around in the surrounding spaces.
And I would say on the design side, I know the question was what that time frame is. Sort of to Pat's point about cost, it does sort of depend on how much square feet you're building out and how big your project is and how much we have to plan. But there are ways that we can compress that timeline. Maybe we get into design development where we're really understanding the look and the feel and the details of the project. And then we send it out to permitting because we have a set that covers all of the life safety issues. The building department maybe doesn't really care what the detail of the cabinetry is. And so we can issue those permit drawings right at the end of the design development phase, when traditionally maybe they were submitted after construction documents. And now your construction documents are being finished and your permit is being looked at the same time frame. So we can consolidate those phases together so that there's an economy of scale there to how much time we're taking up overall for that project.
That's a great point, Becky. And in terms of building permits, ISD is a little bit backed up. Permits are taking a little bit longer in Boston and in Cambridge. So that's also another consideration. during the process.
So we're approaching the end of our time together. I just, I think it's also great to share those lessons learned and the watch outs. So I know, Becky, you had a couple of key watch outs to share with the group that maybe we could.
Yeah, I know we've mentioned it a lot. We haven't really gone into it in detail, but we have a bunch of players here, but there's also some other team members that are going to need to be needed for your project. Pat mentioned AV, IT, furniture. We really do want to be designing alongside them because they're going to have requirements for space for their systems that we want to make sure that we have accounted for so that we're not eating into lab space or office space later to try to get those in. We mentioned long lead times a lot. It's fume hoods, it's lighting, it's generators, all of those lab casework, those can be a longer lead item. And then, as Jennifer has mentioned earlier, really your lab safety, your process, how you're getting materials in and out of the building, where is the freight elevator in the building in relation to your actual tenant space? What are you going to be bringing those through? And does that work for how you want to be operating your facility?
Oh, that's great. That flow is so important. Suddenly you're looking at a facility that doesn't have a freight elevator, but you're going to have a vivarium, and how you're going to make that work is really tricky. And Safety Partners always wants to be looking around corners for showstoppers. And so that getting engaged earlier in the process helps us, and helps you navigate that local, state, and federal regulation, so that suddenly you're not without a wastewater permit and you can't operate, or you have to, figure out these workarounds, or your RODI water and the reject water, how you handle that, how you plumb that. There's so many nuances that are really based on municipality to municipality that we want to make sure that, we can help you navigate with the whole team throughout the process. So we're just at our time. I think we've covered our questions.
Jennifer, would it be okay if I just added a quick logistics note, if you don't mind?
Sure, yeah.
I know that a couple of people ran into some difficulty accessing the call at the beginning, so they may have joined a little bit late. So I just wanted to let everyone know, don't worry, a recording of the full presentation will be available shortly, and I will notify you just as soon as it's ready. And thanks for your patience and not giving up on us and getting on with us today.
Yeah, apologize for the difficulty. That's the challenge of our virtual world now. We all have a little bit of challenge, but we're making it work, and that's what we have to just move forward and make it work. I want to thank everyone for attending today. It's been great to share. Thank you to the panelists for sharing all your insights. We hope that some of what you heard today is going to resonate with you, and as you look to plan your project, please feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to hear from you and how we can help with your project and go as smoothly as possible as you get to that lab space. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.